Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justus, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
And I'm Nik Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State, and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State, and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Nik, how are we doing?
I'm great, Zach. Good to be here. How are you?
I am doing good. Today we are talking AI agents. So a few weeks ago, we went big on artificial general intelligence with Ray Schroeder. Make sure and check that one out if you haven't already. It's an absolute banger. Today we're rewinding to the current story, AI agents, what they are, what they can do, and what they mean for campuses. So in some ways we've done the preliminary version of this and then the super advanced version, because Nik, you wrote a piece about AI assistants. Mm-hmm. Why don't you sort of define and give us the sort of backstory on the most basic part of this?
Yeah, so the most basic part is the intentional assistant, where you go to the AI tool and ask it to do something. So I wrote a piece, the assistant for the rest of us, talking about how, instructors, professors at, teaching heavy schools can utilize generative AI like chatgpt and NotebookLM and others to make their work easier and more enjoyable, everything from research to teaching related materials. So that's kind of the basic one, where you intentionally go and do the thing and have the interaction with it, and then it gives you a product and you can iterate on that. But the agents are sort of the next step.
Well, let's talk about some different definitions about what an AI agent is. I found this one from World Economic Forum. Autonomous systems that sense, learn, and act. That would be something that you would sort of turn loose maybe on a task and then be able to walk away from.
Yeah, I think that's, well, I was going to say on that, like part of the definition here is that like ChatGPT has now, it has persistent memory. So one of the things that agents are is that they are intentional. You set it to do something. It's not a thinking robot. It's not an artificial general intelligence. So you still have to initiate something. And because it has the model, it has a memory, and it has a capacity to sort of act on your instructions, it can then begin doing multi-step kinds of activities in the background without your continual intervention. And so the Google, sort of puts parameters around having reasoning, planning, and utilizing memory to then do an autonomous action after you've kind of set it on its path.
Yeah, and I like those first two ones. The Yan et al. Decision, and we can link to these in the show notes, but the idea of autonomous, goal-directed, proactive, and can collaborate with learners. To me, this starts to shift a little bit more into AGI territory, especially the autonomous and proactive parts. Mm-hmm. I like the first two ones seem a little bit more grounded to me.
Yeah, and I think there are things that we are going to be using within the near-term horizon, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
If not, people, of course, are already using them today.
Right.
But more and more of us.
Yeah, and so we'll make this concrete by talking a little bit about what agents can do today. So I want to start off with a personal experience. When ChatGPT 5 rolled out, I was reading more about agent capabilities and wanting to just familiarize myself a little bit. So I went in and just started a chat with GPT-5 about what are you capable of in terms of agents, and we went back and forth, and I said, so if I wanted you to survey every day the landscape of articles about the intersection of artificial intelligence and higher ed and then email those to me, could you do that? And we went back and forth, but the short answer was no, that I would kind of have to come back in every day and sort of remind it to keep doing that in the same thread, because it would have that context memory that you were talking about. And I was like, okay, that's actually not that impressive or that helpful. And I had forgotten about that for about 6 weeks until about a week ago, I got an email from OpenAI with a summary of the news stories about AI in higher ed for the day. I didn't think anything of it. I thought maybe that's just a weird glitch, but then I got one the next day, and I got back into the system. We had a confusing exchange, but I gave it some additional parameters, and now I get an email every morning at 7:30 with the two most prominent and news stories that are getting traction on that topic. And so it's a little clunky, and clearly the system itself, I don't think quite sort of has a good way of explaining what it is that it's doing. But it was my first window into those systems operating autonomously and not so much with my prompting the way you would with an assistant.
Yeah. Some of my dabbling in this, well, one thing is that we should say is that the idea that computers could do things autonomously for us goes back, I'm sure, to the beginning of computing, right? But for decades now, especially on the Apple platforms, they've had Automator, and then they bought a company called Shortcuts. And so for those of you familiar with sort of automating your computers to do things, whether it's a geolocation, so every time I get to campus, it turns on Do Not Disturb just from a geofence. Have the lights go off when I leave the geolocation of my house. All those kinds of things where you're automating, intentionally setting your computer to do if then do that, if this then do that. That's kind of where we're at with some of these things now. It's like you're setting an automation for these agents, but these agents can also do way more than just yes or no, which my phone can do. That's where things get into, like, if you were kind of like set, I think you've dabbled a little this with the sort of deeper reasoning models, thinking models in ChatGPT, but I have too, where you upload something really complex or deep and you ask it to do an extended thing where you can go off and do work while it's doing work in the background, and then maybe in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or even the next day, you come back and it's done the thing, and then you can action from there.
Yeah, so I want to go through 3 different sort of examples of this to make this more concrete for the listener. So in terms of, the one that I think is probably the easiest for people to understand is the research. In ChatGPT, it's 5 Pro. That is what is the research. And we should know that's the most resource intensive, or one of the most resource intensive things that you can do with ChatGPT. But so I don't use it very often, but for instance, a couple of weeks ago I had a sort of high stakes presentation that I was giving. So I uploaded the slide deck, I turned on Pro mode, and I gave it all the context that I had. Here's who I'm speaking to, here's how much time I have, here's some of the things that I'm worried about. It already knows a bunch of stuff about me and my work from other conversations. And then I said, I want your feedback on the content, where you anticipate the rough spots being, what sort of questions I'm going to get asked, and everything like that. I hit go, and then I went to CES. And then when I came back 15 minutes later, it had wrapped, and it had feedback, some of which I incorporated, some of which wasn't very good. But that's a sort of real basic sort of agent model that's still approximate to the assistant piece. But it's not like it needed additional direction while it was working for 5-15 minutes in the background.
Well, what maybe the next step for this, at least in our domain, is that you log in the morning and you give it, here's 5 things I want you to do today, and here's some basic parameters around those things, and then it just does them, and you check in periodically to get those things as you need them. The idea is that this is using your context, the things that you've already given it, and allowing it to sort of reason on its own based upon those contexts and its world knowledge and the internet, then produce something for you so that you could come in, you've got your talking points, your slide deck, and your other thing. Now you can get down to editing and reworking them, right?
Yeah, and that's an excellent sort of example, and I think that one's easy to understand, or easier for most people to understand. The second one, some people may have heard the term vibe coding or model coding. This is the idea of you have these systems produce computer code that does a task, and you don't know how to write Python or whatever. You're just asking it to do something, and then it's producing code that does something. And I have a concrete example of this from one of my best friends who works in mobile app development for a healthcare startup. And you'll excuse me, I'm going to take some privilege and tell a quick story here. He, really smart guy, been a developer for a long time, really great at what he does. Their code base has gotten kind of mature now, and so we read this book on code-based maintenance. Sounds like the most boring thing I could possibly imagine, but he made it through it, and in doing so, he was like, oh, we need to do some of this. And the book is one of those things where somebody writes a book, but then it's really sort of a pitch for a consultancy service because the author is part of a group and they offer service. So the idea is you read the book, you're like, oh my God, we need to do this. And then you pay them, I don't know how much money, $10,000, $100,000, I don't know how much this stuff costs. And then they come out or they remote in and do some of that stuff and then show you some metrics about how it is that your code base works. So my friend read the book and he's like, I don't even want to fill out the money request to like have these folks come out. I'll bet I can just vibe code this. And then we're talking about somebody who's an experienced software developer. And he and I had vibe coded a couple things when he had visited a couple weeks before, and he was like, I wonder if I could just do this. And so he sat down and he needed 3 different tools. The first one didn't work. The second one, he one-shotted it, meaning that he gave a prompt and it worked perfect straight out the gate. And then the third try, he needed something a little bit different, and it produced not quite what he wanted, but then he was able to edit it using natural language. So he wasn't going in and debugging as an expert. He was just telling their sort of layer on top of Anthropic's Claude, oh, there's a problem with how you made this, make it so that I have a slider and I can change the size of these things. But by the time he was done, he had these tools that gave him a visual interface to understand these different blocks of code and how it is that they work together, which ones are interdependent, that kind of stuff that he had just done in-house, and then immediately saved his company however much money it would have normally cost to do that. So that's I was kind of blown away because that was a incredibly clear use case.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. That's way outside sort of the areas that I normally work or think in. So that's great. Well, just real quick, another one I think that might be useful especially for researchers who do interviews, is I would use Zoom for my interviews, and it would produce a video and a transcript, but they had to use a whole bunch of other services to get that transcript cleaned up, then get it into the coding software. But what I'd love Zoom to have would be, if Zoom or some other software, that it basically is recording, transcribing, and already through this engineered kind of framework I give it, doing the agent work of the transcription, a first pass on keywords, a first pass on what are the highlights, and basically, give me the top 10 talking points and areas I should really focus on because I'm interested in X. And so it could already start doing that stuff. So by the time I get it into writing the next day, I already have a lot of that first pass of that basic prep work done. That's where I see this stuff really becoming useful.
Yeah, absolutely, from a researcher perspective. And I hear about some other stuff. I listen to the AI Daily Brief with Nathaniel Whittemore, and they're constantly going through these different business use cases. And I mean, he and his team even built a custom GPT that answers questions that potential clients bring to them, and then in the event that they're interested in hearing more, it can go into their calendars and just like book time with the client. So we're starting to see these things make their way into everyday corporate usage in ways that would have just been unimaginable a couple of years from now. And you can see some of the higher ed implications, right? You spin up a bot that is the sort of first responder for a class that you're teaching, and it's answering students' questions, but in the event that it sort of hits a wall and it can't get any further, it's literally accessing your Outlook calendar and booking a 30-minute Zoom meeting with yet another app, and it's doing all that behind the scenes. This isn't science fiction. There are people who are skilled at using this. They can do that right now. There are probably people that we work with on campus that can do that right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure the companies are already thinking of plugins and APIs that'll help other companies with their apps and whatnot be plugged into these kind of things.
Yeah. So, but there are some sort of things that are not quite there yet, but we've seen prototypes floating around, and there was an early Anthropic sort of agent that you could use. There's this thing called Mantis, which I've seen some demos of, and it's kind of horrifying. You see basically what seems to me like a computer virus taking over your computer and manipulating the mouse and like clicking on stuff and everything like that. And those kind of things don't seem like they're particularly useful now, but with the arc of how fast this stuff changes, it's tough to imagine any more than a year out from having something that you're like, I want to take a trip to Tahoe, and you're not asking ChatGPT, make me a mock itinerary. It's like booking a rental car, researching Airbnbs, weather patterns, making kayak reservations for you, and actually just doing
that. So right now, we're kind of at the stage where you kind of have to keep interacting with it. But going back to this idea that I've said elsewhere about products and infrastructure, though, it's like a device. So right now you have apps and browsers, And that's where a lot of this is happening. But if we have AI first devices, as horrifying as that might seem to many people, that's where you're really going to see the agent model have to take off, because you don't want a device that you have to constantly keep talking to do all of those 10 steps to get your vacation planned or whatever it is. You want to say one thing and have it do it, and then check off when you think it's done a good job.
Yeah, and that's why, and I don't want to get too Silicon Valley focused with what we're doing here, but that's why you're seeing all of this jockeying around a new browser that might be a competitor for Chrome or Safari, because a lot of these AI companies think that in order to have agents in control of a browser, it needs to be an AI native browser rather than having something where AI is like tacked onto Windows Edge or something like that. And so some of these companies are actually spinning up their own browsers because they know that having that agentic capability incorporated into the sort of fundamental structure of the browser is going to be necessary for them to do the kind of things that you're talking about.
Yeah, so let's just pivot there then to implications for higher ed. So why don't you start us off on that one?
Yeah, so I think that we can think about this from a couple of different perspectives, and let's start from the sort of instructor perspective. So we can have a near automation of a lot of stuff that we might do as professors. We already sort of speculated about spinning up a sort of a help bot that might be a first interface for students, book time on your calendar, those sort of things. And I know it's controversial, but you can certainly imagine somebody spinning up something that then there wouldn't be manual grading, that then it would actually go in and make determinations about students' grade and even enter those grades into a gradebook in Canvas or in some other LMS. I'm not recommending that. I still think that that's a bad idea, but we're there in terms of those capabilities existing.
Some company will propose that. But you know, for those of you who aren't instructors, people ask me, how's work going? And most of the time I have to tell them, because I teach a lot of online and asynchronous classes, I'm actually just doing manipulation of our learning management system. I'm clicking a mouse over and over and dragging and typing and entering things into a website. So if the browser was an agent, if it could intervene on some of those things and automate those things that I do every semester, every week, it's the same stuff, it takes a lot of my time, and it's not very rewarding, but it's necessary. So I think that that's an area of innovation that could help, you know, in those capacities as instructors, make our life easier.
But I know a lot of the sort of hand-wringing and concern about this has to do with the student perspective, and we're going to get to some of that later, but I did want to pause here on some of the positive possible applications of this, where I do think that having advising chatbots and that moving from advising chatbots to like agent advisors is potentially amazing, right? But imagine a student sitting down and having a conversation with the advising chatbot that the three of us actually all use, and then not going over to a different window and doing that, but saying, that schedule looks great, book it. Put that in my calendar and set up a reminder structure so that not only do I never miss a class, but I get reminded for each individual assignment. You know, a syllabus shows up in that class. You upload the syllabus, you're like, translate this into calendar events each week for me, set up a reminder structure. I need a study group with these three people, coordinate our calendars. Right? That's a world where some of the sort of busy work that students hate doing, the sort of logistical work, could possibly be offloaded, and it might actually make their world a little bit easier and better. Actually, in my work in the library, sometimes I overhear student experiences, and I happen to overhear two students in the elevator, and they were getting off, and one of them she thought she had gotten bad advice. For all I know, she just didn't hear something correctly from an advisor, and she was going to have to extend her time at Chico State for an additional semester. That's thousands of dollars, probably $10,000 once you factor in living expenses and lost earnings. You know, imagine a world where that doesn't happen, but instead a student gets that advice, and then rather than having to remember that or write it down or whatever, there's just a pop-up that says, would you like me to book this schedule for you? And then you just click yes.
Yeah, so certainly a lot of positive, or in ways that could be useful in the classroom and for student support. I'm sure, in administrative units, I think, like, I'm thinking about my chair. There is an incredible amount of work that she has to do for schedule planning, and that itself takes a lot of time. Is there ways that these things could help automate parts of that in the background and do things like that, but make it actionable? That's the goal here, is not more steps we have to take, but less steps because it's taking the steps for us.
Yeah, I do think there's real potential here, especially because the data sets that you're oftentimes working with trying to make those things happen are enormous, right? You're talking about, there's one person on campus that's basically in charge of academic scheduling. That means she's basically staring at an Excel sheet with hundreds of rooms all over campus, knowing that any piece that she moves is going to cause this domino effect and impact hundreds of students and faculty members, right? So you can certainly imagine a world where an agent does a first pass at that, or is able to sort of flush out the downstream implications and provide advice saying, don't do that, think about this alternative instead.
Yeah. Well, to call back to our episode on when we built the assessment or the advisor bot, most of this all comes down to, do you have good data? Do you have access to it? Like, yes. That's going to be one of the biggest limitations, and also where the hangups and also mistakes and errors and pitfalls is the kind of access it has to information, whether that's relevant or not relevant, or good data or bad data. So, like, if it doesn't have up-to-date classroom schedule and everybody's agent is like doing the schedule, but it's all wrong, then you have this, campus-wide, crap show, basically. So, go ahead.
There are another couple of sort of workflow and operational things that we're just going to mention real quickly. One is that, and we mentioned this before, that especially with agents and research agents, it's pretty unclear what the future of educational consultancy companies like EAB and Everspring, what that future is going to look like. Because a lot of what they're doing is taking this like cross-campus perspective, oftentimes accessing proprietary data, and then producing reports with actionable items, look to expand this offering, move this online, those sort of things. And it's expensive. And it's tough to imagine that business model persisting where every campus has access to these sort of like agentic consulting, where it can do that not just once every 5 years, but you can just press a button and walk away, and half an hour later, there's a detailed report with action items based on your set of data that you have inputted about the history of your major, your college, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we leave this, we haven't really spoken about some of the dangers and pitfalls and sort of areas that people might be concerned about agents as they become integrated into higher education. So you want to start us off with a little bit of thinking around that?
Yeah, there's just no doubt that these things are going to be prone to error. I mean, they're built on the back of large language models, which even the most advanced ones with a maximum degree of context still hallucinate, right? So now you see a magnification of those errors, because it's not just bad advice, it's I booked the wrong class for you and you went the entire semester and now you've wasted all this time.
Yeah.
And so, I it's not to say that humans don't make errors, we certainly do. But yeah, I think that when we put these things in charge of action, not just in terms of advice, there is the real risk that we are going to amplify the errors that they are already prone to making.
And that's one of the biggest critiques, or for critics that they have of AI in general, especially AGI and things like that, is that we're turning over agency and decision-making power to these things. So I was also thinking that we should circle back just real quick to, as we automate parts of our job away into these, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but there is a risk by actually taking things that we have been hired to do or that students are expected to do and putting them on the system. So like the grading thing, what do you think of that?
I mean, yeah, I think that's such a great point, Nick, and it's probably one of the most controversial aspects of AI integration into higher ed right now. And there are several layered risks with grading using AI agents to grade student work. The first one is error, the same one that shows up everywhere. And that's not just error in terms of hallucination, but also the manifestation of bias, right? Because like if these systems are prone towards recognizing a certain type of English, and then your students are at a variety of sort of English experiences and perspectives, then they're going to systematically sort of denigrate students that write in a different tone or a different style of English. There's an opportunity for us to magnify those biases that we may already have in a way that you may not if you're looking at that with a more empathetic human disposition. And then there's also the risk of the erosion of the value of the institution itself, right? Like if students are churning in work that is AI generated or partially AI generated, and we're using AI to grade that student work, like we're just cashing checks and printing degrees at that point.
Yeah. Okay, this really is a great segue into this week's irresponsible speculation, because one of the biggest things here is that the AI companies love to demonstrate that they can do it all and that they will continue to push that frontier into being able to do it all. What happens though if they can do it all? And that's an aside. We don't know what those limits and how to put them on our institutions yet, but what if they could do it all? So take it away.
Yeah, our irresponsible speculation is that right now, not in the future, but right now, there are people, probably more than one, and I think probably reporters, maybe at like college newspapers or something like that, that are enrolled in classes and basically for the purposes of creating a story are going to have a stack of AI agents completely, they will turn them loose on especially an online asynchronous course, and the agents will complete the course. And my irresponsible speculation is that is going to be the next big viral higher ed AI news story, is a student or a reporter using an agent stack to complete an entire course and then writing an article about how the technology completely undermines online education.
We thought of it. It's got to be out there. I think someone's doing that right now. And if they're not going to write the story, there's going to be people doing this. It's sort of the next frontier in scam, basically, right?
And you had a second level of speculation about this in terms of monitoring.
Yeah, so here's another irresponsible speculation related to this, is that, as universities become targets in the political environment and are deemed sort of like enemies of the state or whatever, that people could train or enroll bots into professors' classes and harvest the data from conversations and posts and lectures as an agent that's basically infiltrated into the class but isn't known by anybody and is not actually a person, so it's less risky, and then they can use that information. Like, this is a dystopian idea.
But you could do it at scale.
You could do it at scale.
In a way that you really can't right now, right? Like, you could have one sort of anti-Semitic essay that is submitted in classes by 50 different bots, and then the one time that gets an A, then that becomes fodder for a class of political operatives convinced that universities everywhere are engaged in a deeply anti-Semitic project.
Yeah. So that's
irresponsible speculation.
It sure was. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and connect with us on Blue Sky at meltsintoair.bsky.social and on LinkedIn, Zach Justus and Nik Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.